everyone, welcome to another episode of Reading Rainbows, where we're reading Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. And today is chapter 25, The Wrong Ending. Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. By order of the author per G.G. Chief of Ordnance. Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And again, you gotta love Mark Twain. Yeah, he was an awesome author, very witty. These little meta things in his books were hilarious, and even just quotes by him were, wonderful. One that I've used often in my own personal life is, rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated, or something like that. And I've used it often before because when I was 15, apparently there were rumors that I had died. So, made a great opportunity for me to use that quote, especially when I went back to my old hometown and kids looked at me like I was a ghost and ran. And that was before I found out that I had supposedly died. Pinocchio said nothing for a long time after Mo had finished his story. Paula had gone off long ago in search of Pippo and Rico. Maggie heard them running over the wooden floorboards above them, back and forth, jumping, sliding, giggling, and squealing. But in Finoglio's kitchen, it was so quiet you could hear the tick of the clock on the wall by the window. Does he have those scars on his face? I expect you know what I mean. The fairies treated the cuts. That's why there are only slight scars left. Little more than 3 pale lines on the skin. Is that right? Finoglio looked inquiringly at Mo, who nodded. I don't know why I can never say that word. It's just such a hard word for me to say. Finoglio looked out of the window again, brushing a few crumbs off his pants. Basta scarred him, he said. They both fancied the same girl. Mo nodded. Yes, I know. A window was open in the house opposite, and you could hear a woman scolding a child inside. I suppose I ought to feel very, very proud, murmured Finoglio. Every writer wants to create lifelike characters, and mine are so lifelike they've walked straight off the page. That's because my father read them out of the book, said Maggie. He can do it with other books, too. Yes, of course, Finoglio nodded. A good thing you reminded me. Otherwise I might start taking myself for a minor god, mightn't I? But I'm sorry about your mother. Although, depending on how you look at it, that wasn't really my fault. It's worse for my father, said Maggie. I don't remember her. Mo looked at her, startled. Of course not. You were younger than my grandchildren, said Finoglio thoughtfully. I'd really like to see him, he added. Dustfinger, I mean. Oh, that's not good. Dustfinger didn't even want to be mentioned, and now you've gone and told the whole story. And, oh, Dustfinger's gonna be mad. Naturally, I'm sorry now that I thought up such an unhappy ending for the poor fellow, but it somehow seemed right for him. As Shakespeare puts it so well, everybody plays his part, and mine is a sad one. He looked out into the street. Something fell and broke on the floor above them, but Finoglio didn't seem particularly interested. Are those your children? Asked Maggie, pointing up at the ceiling. Heaven help us, no. My grandchildren. One of my daughters lives in this village, too. They're always visiting me, and I tell them stories. I tell half the village stories, but I don't feel like writing them down anymore. He turned to Mo with an inquiring look. Where is he now? Dustfinger? I can't tell you. He doesn't want to see you. He got quite a shock when my father told him about you, added Maggie. But Dustfinger must be told what happens to him, she thought. He must. Then he'll understand why he really can't go back. And all the same, she thought next, he'll still be homesick. Homesick forever. I must see him, only once. Don't you understand? Finoglio looked pleadingly at Mo. I could just follow you, inconspicuously. How would he know who I am? I want to find out if he really looks the way I imagined him. That's all. However, Mo shook his head. I think you'd better leave him alone. Yeah, I think so too. Nonsense. Surely I can see him whenever I like. After all, I invented him. And you killed him off, Maggie pointed out. Well, Finoglio raised his hands helplessly. I wanted to make the story more exciting. Don't you like exciting stories? Only if they have happy endings. Happy endings? Finoglio snorted scornfully and then listened to what was going on upstairs. Something or someone had landed heavily on the wooden floorboards. Loud howls followed the thud. Finoglio strode to the door. Wait here, I'll be back in a minute, he called, disappearing into the corridor. Mo, whispered Maggie, you've got to tell Dustfinger. You've got to tell him he can't go back. But Mo shook his head. He won't want to listen, I promise you. I've tried more than a dozen times. Perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring him together with Finoglio after all. He might well be more likely to believe his creator than me. With a sigh, he brushed a few cake crumbs off Finoglio's kitchen table. There was a picture in Inkheart, he murmured, raising the palm of his hand over the raising the palm of his hand over the tabletop as if to conjure up the picture itself. It showed a group of women standing under an arched gateway in splendid clothes as if they were going to a party. One of them had hair as fair as your mother's. You can't see the woman's face in the picture. She has her back turned, but I always imagined it was her. Crazy, isn't it? Maggie placed her hand on his. Mo, promise you won't go back to the village, she said. Please, promise me you won't try to get that book back. The second hand on Finoglio's kitchen clock was dividing time into painfully small segments. At last Mo answered. I promise, he said. Look at me and say it. He did. I promise, he repeated. There's just one more thing I want to discuss with Finoglio, and then we'll go home and forget about the book. Happy now? Maggie nodded, although she wondered what else there could be to discuss. Finoglio returned with a tearful Pippo on his back. The other two children followed their grandfather, looking crestfallen. Holes in the cake, and now a dent in his forehead, too. I think I ought to send all of you home. Finoglio told them crossly as he put Pippo down on a chair. Then he rummaged around in the big cupboard until he found a Band-Aid, which he stuck none too gently on his grandson's cut forehead. Mo pushed his chair back and stood up. I've changed my mind, he said. I'll take you to Dustfinger after all. Finoglio turned to him in surprise. Perhaps you can make it clear to him once and for all that he can't go back, Mo continued. Goodness knows what he might do next. I'm afraid it could be dangerous for him. And I have this idea. Rather a weird idea, but I'd like to talk to you about it. I'm almost afraid of what this idea might be. What kind of idea could he have? Excuse me. Weirder than what I've heard already? I'd say that's hardly possible. Finoglio's grandchildren had disappeared into the cupboard again. Giggling, they closed the doors. Very well, I'll listen to your idea, said Finoglio, but I want to see Dustfinger first. Mo looked at Maggie. It wasn't often that he broke a promise, and he clearly felt far from comfortable about it. Maggie could understand that only too well. He's waiting in the square, said Mo hesitantly. but let me talk to him first." "In the square here?" Finoglio's eyes widened. "That's wonderful!" With one stride, he was standing in front of the little mirror hanging next to the kitchen door, running his fingers through his black hair, almost as if he were afraid Dustfinger might be disappointed by his creator's appearance. "I'll pretend I don't see him until you call me," he said. "Yes, that's the thing to do. Or just not come at all. This is a terrible idea." There was a clattering in the cupboard, and Pippo stumbled out in a jacket that came down to his ankles and a hat so large that it had slipped right over his eyes. "Of course!" Finoglio took the hat off Pippo's head and put it on his own. "That's it. I'll take the children with me. A grandfather with 3 grandchildren. Nothing about that sight to make anyone uneasy, is there?" Mo just nodded and pushed Meggie out into the narrow hallway. As they walked down the street leading back to the square and their car, Finoglio followed a few meters behind them, with his grandchildren running and jumping around him like 3 puppies. Alright. And we'll also read chapter 26, since chapter 25 was so short. Chapter 26. Shivers down the spine and a foreboding. And that's when she put her book down, and looked at me, and said it. "Life isn't fair, Bill. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be." William Goldman, The Princess Bride. And I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I love The Princess Bride. It is awesome. Go, watch it. Read it, enjoy it, love it. Dustfinger sat on the chilly stone steps, waiting. He felt sick with fear, but he wasn't quite sure of what. Perhaps the war memorial behind him reminded him too much of death. He had always been afraid of death, which he imagined as cold too, like a night without fire. Now, however, he dreaded something else even more. Its name was Sorrow, and it had been stalking him like a second shadow ever since Silvertongue lured him into this world. Sorrow that made his limbs heavy and turned the sky gray. Beside him, the boy was running up and down the steps, up and down tirelessly with light feet and a cheerful face, as if Silvertongue had read him straight into paradise. What could be making him so happy? Dustfinger looked around at the narrow houses, pale yellow, pink, peach, the dark green shutters at the windows and the rust-red tiles on the roofs, and oleander flowering in front of a wall as if its branches were on fire. Cats stalking past the warm walls. Farid stole up to one of them, stroked its gray fur, and put it on his lap, although it dug its claws into his thigh. "You know what people do to keep the numbers of cats down around here?" Dustfinger stretched his legs and blinked up at the sun. "When winter comes, they take their own cats indoors for safety. Then they put out dishes of poisoned food for the strays." Why you gotta be so mean, Dustfinger? I mean, even if it's true, come on. He's just petting a cat. Do you really have to bring him down? Farid still fondled the gray cat's pointed ears, but his face was rigid and grim, not a trace left of the happiness that had just made it look so soft and open. Dustfinger glanced quickly aside. Why had he said that? Had the happiness on the boy's face upset him so much? Farid let the cat go and climbed the steps to the memorial. He was still sitting there on the wall, legs drawn up, when the other two came back. Silvertongue had no book with him, and he looked strained. His guilty conscience was clearly visible on his face. And this is why Mo should never, ever, ever break a promise. Why? What could have made Silvertongue look so guilty? Dustfinger glanced suspiciously around without knowing quite what he was looking for. Silvertongue's face always showed his feelings. He was an open book, which any stranger could read. His daughter was different. It wasn't so easy to make out what was going on in her mind. But now, as she came toward him, Dustfinger thought she saw something like concern in her eyes, perhaps even pity. What had that writer fellow said to make the girl look at him like that? He got up and brushed the dust off his pants. "No copies left, am I right?" he asked, when the two of them had reached him. "You're right. They've all been stolen," replied Silvertongue, "years ago." His daughter never took her eyes off Dustfinger. "Why are you staring at me like that, Princess?" he snapped. "Do you know something I don't?" Bullseye! An accidental one, too. He hadn't wanted to score a bullseye at all, certainly not a direct one on an uncomfortable truth. The girl bit her lip, still looking at him with that same mixture of pity and concern. Poor Meggie, she now knows that Dustfinger dies, knows at least the majority of how he dies, and feels that he really ought to know about this so that he can understand why he can't go back into the book, but at the same time feels like it's not her place to tell him. Dustfinger rubbed his hand over his face, feeling his scars on it like a picture postcard saying, "Greetings from Basta." He could never forget Capricorn's rabid dog for a single day, even if he wanted to. "To help you please the girls even better in the future," Basta had hissed in his ear before wiping the blood off his knife. Oh, curse it all! Dustfinger kicked the nearest wall so hard that he felt the pain in his foot for days to come. "You've told that writer about me," he accused Mo, "and now even your daughter knows more about me than I do. Very well, out with it. I want to know now, too. Tell me. You always wanted to tell me, after all." "Basta hangs me, is that it? Strings me up and tightens the noose until I'm dead as a doornail, right? But why should that bother me? Basta's in this world now, isn't he? The story's changed. It must have changed. Basta can't hurt me if you just send me back there where I belong." Dustfinger took a step toward Silvertongue as if to grab him, shake him, take out on him all that had been done to himself. But Meggie came between them. "Stop it! It's not Basta!" she cried, pushing him away. "It's one of Capricorn's men, and he's waiting for you in the book. They want to kill Gwyn, and you try to help him, so they kill you instead. Nothing about that has changed. It will simply happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. Do you understand? You must stay here. You can't go back, ever!" Dustfinger stared at the girl as if he could shut her up that way, but she held his gaze. She even tried to take his hand. "You should be glad to be here," she faltered as he retreated from her. "You can escape from them here. You can go away, far away, and—" Her voice quivered. Perhaps she'd seen the tears in Dustfinger's eyes. Angrily, he wiped them away with his sleeve and looked around like an animal in a trap, searching for some way out. But there was no way out. No going forward, and even worse, no going back. The trio of women standing at the bus stop glanced curiously in his direction. Dustfinger often attracted such glances. Anyone could see he didn't belong here, a stranger forever. Or, maybe they're just curious about you. You're a good-looking guy even with scars on your face, at least that's how you've been described. And, you're not from that town, so you're a stranger to them, but that doesn't mean that you're a stranger in the whole entire world. Yeah. Maybe they're just curious. Maybe they think you're cute and want to observe you a little. 3 children and an old man were playing football with a tin can on the other side of the square. Okay, this is not American football. This is, regular football, soccer, not American football. Farid looked at them. The Arab boy had Dustfinger's backpack over his narrow shoulders, and gray cat hairs clung to his pants. He was deep in thought, wriggling his bare toes into the gaps between the paving stones. He was always taking off the sneakers Dustfinger had bought him and going around barefoot, even on hot tarmac, with his shoes tied to the backpack like loot he was taking home. Silvertongue looked at the playing children too. Had he given some sign to the old man with them? The old fellow left the children and came over. Dustfinger took a step back. A shiver ran down his spine. "My grandchildren have been admiring the tame marten that boy has on a chain," said the old man as he approached. Dustfinger took another step backward. Why was the dark-haired man looking at him like that? In quite a different way than the women at the bus stop. "The children say the marten can do tricks and the boy's a fire eater. Perhaps we could come to the show and watch at close range?" The cold shiver spread right through Dustfinger, although the sun was shining down on him. The way the old man looked at him, as if he were a dog who had run away long ago and was now back, tail between his legs, perhaps with lice in his coat, but definitely his, the old man's dog. "Nonsense. We don't do tricks," he managed to say. "There's nothing to see here." He retreated again, but the old man followed him, as if they were linked by an invisible thread. "I'm sorry," said the old man, raising a hand as if to touch Dustfinger's scarred face. Dustfinger's back came up against a parked car. Now the old man was standing right in front of him and still staring. "Go away!" Dustfinger pushed him roughly back. "Farid, bring me my things." The boy hurried to his side. Dustfinger snatched the backpack from his hand, picked up the marten and stowed him in the pack, taking no notice of the animal's sharp snapping teeth. The old man stared at Gwyn's horns. Fingers flying, Dustfinger slung the pack over his shoulder and tried to push past him. "Please, I only want to talk to you." The old man barred his way, reaching for his arm. "Well, I don't want to talk to you." Dustfinger tried to free himself from the bony fingers. They were surprisingly strong, but Dustfinger had the knife, Basta's clasp knife. He took it out of his pocket, snapped it open, and held it under the old man's chin. His hand was trembling. He had never enjoyed threatening anyone with a knife, but the old man let go, and Dustfinger ran. He ignored whatever Silvertongue was calling after him. He just ran for it as he had often done in the past. He could trust his legs, even if he didn't yet know where they were taking him. He left the village and the road behind, dodged under some trees, ran through wild grass, plunged in among the mustard-yellow bramble bushes, let the silvery foliage of the olive trees hide him. He had to get away from the houses, away from the paved roads. Wild country had always protected him. Only when every breath he drew hurt him did he throw himself down into the long grass behind an abandoned cistern where frogs croaked and the rainwater that had collected among the gray stones steamed in the sun. He lay there gasping, listening to his own heartbeat and staring at the sky. He jumped. "Who's that?" The boy stood there. Farid had followed him. "Go away!" shouted Dustfinger. The boy crouched down among the wildflowers that grew everywhere, blue and yellow and red splashes of bright color in the grass. "I don't want you!" snapped Dustfinger. The boy said nothing, but picked a wild orchid and examined the bloom. It looked like a bumblebee on the tip of a flower stem. "What a strange flower," he murmured. "I've never seen one like that before." Dustfinger sat up and leaned against the side of the cistern. "You'll be sorry if you keep running after me," he said. "I'm going back. You know where to." Only when he said it did he realize that he had made up his mind, long ago. Yes, he was going back. Dustfinger the coward was going back into the lion's den. Never mind what Silvertongue said, nor what his daughter thought. There was only one thing he wanted. He had never wanted anything else, and if he couldn't have it now, then at least he could hope that one day his wish would come true. The boy stayed sitting there. "Go away, will you? Go back to Silvertongue. He'll look after you." Farid sat there unmoved, his arms around his knees. "You're going back to that village?" "Yes, the village where the devils and demons live. Believe me, they'll kill a boy like you and eat you for breakfast. They'll enjoy their coffee all the more afterward." Farid stroked his cheeks with the orchid. He made a face as the petals tickled his skin. "Gwyn wants to get out," he said. He was right. The marten was biting the fabric of the backpack and sticking his muzzle out of it. Dustfinger undid the straps and freed him. Gwyn blinked up at the sun, chattered crossly, presumably complaining that it was the wrong time of day, and scurried over to the boy. Farid picked him up, put him on his shoulder, and looked earnestly at Dustfinger. "I've never seen flowers like this," he repeated, "or such green hills, or such a clever marten. But I know a lot about the kind of men you mean. They're the same everywhere." Dustfinger shook his head. "These are particularly bad." "No, not particularly." The defiance in Farid's voice made Dustfinger laugh. He himself didn't know why. "We could go somewhere else," said the boy. "No, we couldn't." "Why not? What are you planning to do in that village?" "Steal something," said Dustfinger. The boy nodded, as if stealing were the most natural plan in the world, and carefully put the orchid in his pants pocket. "Will you teach me a little more about fire first, before we go there?" "Before?" Dustfinger couldn't help smiling. The boy was a clever lad, and no doubt knew there wouldn't be any after. "Of course," he said, "I'll teach you everything I know, before we go there." And that's the end of that chapter. I thank you for joining me. I really hope you're enjoying the book, and I will see you next time.